Welcome back to the University of Southern California Institute of Armenian Studies. This is the fourth episode in a series of 5. We're calling the series Network Nation, and we have spoken about Crisis Nation, Knowledge Nation, Digital Nation. And in 2 days, on Friday, our last episode, we will talk about Global Nation, about the communities around the world speaking about their experiences in the post-COVID, post-war situation, communities we don't usually hear from or hear about. And that's the last episode on Friday this week. Today, we're calling today's episode Network Nation. In other words, moving from Crisis Nation, which is where we started, a mode that seems to fit this nation well, going from crisis to crisis. But now, how do we get from Crisis Nation to Network Nation? That's the conversation for today. Is the path through knowledge, as we said in the second episode, is the path through the digital platforms, which is what we said in the last episode? And is the path through disruption? Was COVID a sufficient disruption? If not, was the war? What more would it take to shake up the inward thinking, the insularity of the nation and regain the tradition of global network, especially in an era where borders have become seemingly meaningless in that they are not serving the role for which they were intended. After all, look what's happening in Armenia this week with Azerbaijani encroachment again. And of course, borders don't really know, economy doesn't really know borders anymore, and culture, well, that changed long ago. That's the context in which we will talk about Network Nation today. And our guests, well, let me tell you that we're both pleased and honored that one of our guests is Armenia's ombudsman, the human rights defender, the busiest, most articulate, most vocal person on the public scene these days, Mr. Armenian Tatoyan. And we will hear from Mr. Tatoyan at the very end of this program. We will begin with Professor Sebu Aslanyan of UCLA, followed by Rupen Vartanyan, the philanthropist businessman, followed by a new participant in this public discourse, Karini Rose Mgrdician, and Hampartsum Kakhketsyan, a tech venture capitalist, entrepreneur, thinker. Before we speak with any of them, let me just remind you that this is on YouTube, on Facebook, and you can encourage friends to follow all of this now, today, or later on all of these platforms. I want to welcome back Dr. Shushan Garabedian and Dr. Viken Cheterian, who have been partners in this 4 or 5 episode journey since the beginning. Shushan, Viken, welcome.
Good evening.
So, before we invite our guests, you jump in. Your thoughts on the premise of this series, that Network Nation is a necessary direction or transformation, and what really is it? Shushan, do you want to start?
Sure. I think it's important for us to remember how we define the Armenian story. I was just reviewing this last course I taught, and I kept remembering an arc, right? That the Armenian story is one of dispersion, of diaspora, and multi-locality. As Razmik Panosyan would say, it's geographically wide and historically deep. And I'm not just talking about the post-genocide experience. So I think it's worth highlighting and reminding ourselves that this is the story of the Armenian...
Give me a minute. I'm going to interrupt you. One second while we get my sound figured out.
Sure.
Shushan, please continue. And I'm
sure.
praying.
I was just saying that it's worth reminding that this is the story of the Armenian people, not simply the story of Armenia, right? That as I'm sure Professor Aslanyan will talk about, that I'm sure Viken will talk about, that this is a story of networks of people, often developed outside of historical Armenian homelands, developed by people who were able to cross and transcend all kind of boundaries, physical, cultural, linguistic, social, and often developed in periods when Armenians were stateless politically. So whether these were intellectual networks fashioning a sense of nationalism and nationhood, revolutionary networks, trade and merchant networks, the Hampartsums of this world, current day tech networks, they were
Hampartsum whom we're going to invite very soon.
As Salpi introduced, they were developing and introducing innovations, modernity, new ways of thinking. And, you know, as Rupen Vartanyan likes to say, Armenians were global before global was a thing. So what we should consider is that now, in the last 30 years, we have a state that's been introduced into this larger dynamic. A state with weak institutions, a state that's often been ambivalent about how to engage its very diverse and heterogeneous diaspora, and a diaspora that's had its own share of tensions and hesitations. And often these two have met under intense stress and during periods of crisis. So going back to our spoken wheel metaphor, we're constantly re-examining the dynamics and elements, right? So, and I think the questions we're trying to pose in this series, which I think will culminate in this very episode, are trying to investigate how COVID and the war have shaken up institutions and have led to maybe the evolution and creation and maybe decline of certain institutions and networks. So things like, you know, we always leave the Hayastan emigres out. How has that cohort engaged? How have they transitioned from just remittances to family and friends to Armenia Fund and all kinds of new networks, right? And what about a certain cohort of diaspora youth who weren't engaged before, who went as far as to shun their Armenian identity, but saw the Artsakh war as a social justice issue, not just an Armenian issue, use the framework of indigeneity, use a framework of equity, something that they're comfortable with, a lens that they're comfortable with engaging through. So what kind of new networks have been created and what characteristics are they based on? Is it still crisis-based? Is this professional, humanitarian, aspirational? And maybe even intersectional, maybe even transcending Armenian elements and looking at issues of social justice, of equity, of human rights. So the question is, where do we go from here? And one final comment, and I'm going to pass it on to Viken. I think in these very polarized slogans and calls for unity, along with a very toxic environment on social media platforms, my hope is that we can take lessons from past global Armenian networks, and I'm hoping, you know, Sepu will highlight those for you, examine the situation now and think about maybe future-oriented and vision-oriented networks and what those would look like.
It's all there, 4 episodes and then some. Viken, where do you want to take it?
I want to continue what Shushan already started. My take is that Network Nation is not simply a sexy sounding slogan. It's not just a spin. It's part of our past, right? In the past, Armenians did have networks, global networks of merchants, but also of intellectuals. Ideas, intellectuals interacted with each other. They read each other. They commented on each other's ideas. They traveled from one place to the other to learn and to study. Now, the past does not mean that the present can be the same, right? Between the 15th or the 18th century and our present, many things have changed. We have changed and the world has changed. So we need to think about the past, but we also need to understand the present. And the third point I want to make is that the essence is that there was a common interest binding these people. It was not morality, it was not slogans, it was not we should be like this. It was built on something very solid. So we should find whether we have that cement connecting us in our global dispersion. And to do this in the reality of the emergence of the nation state as a very central player in the last 3 decades.
Shushan mentioned state, I think, once, and you, I don't think, mentioned it. So in this is the spoken wheel again, huh? It's the bicycle wheel that shows up behind me every now and then. That it requires a hub, and then it has spokes, and then it has a wheel. So the role of the state is one that is still unclear. Sometimes it seems in these conversations the diaspora thinks it's the hub. Talk about the state here, Vikin.
In the past, when we had these networks, we had hubs, and the hub moved from one place to the other, right? If we take the 20th century, we had in the 20s and 30s, the intellectual hub was Paris, and then maybe Cairo can be seen as a hub, and then for sure Beirut was a hub. So in the pre-nation state period, we did have hubs, and the hub moved from one place to the other. Now, in the reality of the nation state, it is near impossible to have a central hub outside the nation state. The nation state is so powerful. It mobilizes the Armenian imagination in such a way that it's nearly impossible to recreate the conditions where the hub can be somewhere else and moving. So my idea, my thinking is that Yerevan has to be able intellectually to assume the role of the hub of a very complex, dispersed Armenian reality around the globe.
Shushan, say a little more about the Armenia Immigrate community and the, let's say 30-year, although it's been a little bit more than that, and very quickly about that 30-year trajectory and how today things are different.
Sure. I think we tend to forget that the Armenia cohort is the only one transitioning from majority status to minority status. So they don't come with a diaspora toolkit. They are not second or third diasporas. They have the trajectory of typical immigrants in the US. So that's interesting. And for them, Armenia is not a symbolic place. Armenia is a very real place, right? It's a very real homeland with all its flaws, with all the baggage, and all of the lived memories. So in terms of networks, in terms of connections, this is a interpersonal, personal network-based community, right? They don't need to look at news sources or they don't need to go through institutions. They just pick up the phone and call a family member, a friend, and so on. But I really think COVID and the war impacted the way they engage with Armenia and the way they engage with other diaspora communities. So for once, Armenia and the world was going through the same thing. This was very, very interesting to see people react to a global crisis. And also, like I mentioned in the introduction, right, that we had these kind of tropes, these stereotypes. The Hayastansis don't engage in philanthropy. The Hayastansis don't donate. Hayastansis don't volunteer. They don't do community work, right? And we can talk about why that is later. But all of a sudden, you saw them going outside of these familial, personal networks. And is that an issue of time? Is that an issue of
integrating? Is that something would even have happened 20 years ago?
Exactly.
Is it just the place in the trajectory of that community formation?
Exactly.
I don't know how much of all of this we're going to get to. That was my fault. I should never have asked you to chime in, because now the challenge is even bigger, but here we go. So throughout today's program, I'm going to ask the same question really in different ways. How do the new connectivities that have been created and that our speakers have advocated about, should be created, how will they lead to efficiencies and outcomes? And when do connections become networks? Again, with efficiencies and outcomes. And is this something that should come after Armenians transcend this trauma of loss and seemingly total absence of governance? Or is this something that will lead to transcending that trauma? I don't have answers, and I'm hoping our guests will have some. Our first guest is someone whose field is 17th century Armenian traders. and as such is a historian of the first networks and Armenia as a network nation. Sebu Aslanyan is professor of history and the Richard Hovhannisyan Endowed Chair in Modern Armenian History at UCLA, and he also heads the Promise Institute's Center for Armenian Studies. Sebu, welcome.
Thank you very much, Salpi, for having me.
And thank you for accepting this difficult task. You study, a few hundred years of Armenian history, and we're asking you to talk about it all in about, 10, 12 minutes. Specifically about the global networks that were formed, that are at the basis of what you study, and they were based on, what kinds of information, means of communication, what were their means of trust and verification? Were these simply commercial networks? Were they also linguistic, ethnic, cultural networks? Help us understand what we had, and then help us understand how they contributed so immensely to the formation of culture and nation.
Okay, well, those are very loaded questions. They're very good questions. So I will do my best to give you a concise answer. I will begin by the nature of the networks, the part of your question that addresses the type of networks that there were. So I will begin by saying that I've studied networks and network nation and the idea of a network nation for at least 15, 16 years, beginning in 2004 or 2005. So I know a little bit about the concept behind it. I am a huge advocate of network analysis as a complementary element of understanding history alongside states or nation states. So on that note, I can say several quick things. One, the Armenian networks that we are referring to here, the global Armenian networks of the early modern period, roughly began around the same time at the end of the 1500s and the early years of the 1600s. And since I'm a historian, I need to say a couple of things in terms of context, because without context, there will be no historical understanding. So the networks began with a couple of very traumatic displacements that occurred in the Armenian homeland and on the plateau itself, or on the eastern fringes of Asia Minor. These two displacements that were violent, that led to approximately 400,000 people being forced to leave their homes and establish centers of livelihood elsewhere, were the Jalali uprisings of the Ottoman Empire in the 1590s, late 1590s, as well as the Shah Abbas invasion of that region and the war with the Ottomans and Shah Abbas I, that also resulted in huge displacements of 300,000 plus Armenians. So in the wake of these two traumatic displacements, Armenians came to form a global diaspora that spread from London all the way to Manila, with tiny settlements, and these settlements were connected to each other. These were hubs, as you guys were talking earlier, major hubs of the diaspora, and these hubs are all connected to each other through generally three types of networks. For analytical purposes, these are different networks, different types of networks, but they're all imbricated with one another. They're all overlapping and interconnected, and they feed off one another. And these types are, on the one hand, in terms of importance, trade networks presided over and run in some ways through long-distance merchants. These trade networks, for the most part, were controlled by one set of merchants originally from the township of New Julfa on the outskirts of the Safavid imperial capital, Isfahan. Most people know New Julfans as being very important, savvy global traders who had this global network of settlements. So that's the first type of network. I cannot emphasize how important it is, in my opinion, that trade networks have always been at the forefront of connections and of world history making for all peoples, not just Armenians. The second type of network, one that gets much less attention, but it should never be minimized or underestimated, is what we can call, roughly speaking, a religious or confessional network. That is to say, these are networks that were presided over by what I call religious firms that include the three major centers of Armenian religiosity in the early modern period. And these are, for purposes of simplification, the center of the Armenian Catholicosate of all Armenians at Sup Ejmiadzin, with its own subsidiary networks of parish churches and diocesanal connections. That's one, but that's the confessional network of the Armenian Gregorian Christians or anti-Chalcedonian Church. The second network, of course, that is also part of this religious, under the umbrella of a religious confessional network, is the Catholic Armenian religious network, centered within its hub in Venice in San Lazzaro degli Armeni, which is, of course, as we all know, the center where the Mkhitar Apahar settled in 1717 and where he presided over a renaissance of Armenian culture in the early modern world. The third subset of this religious confessional network is much less studied, hardly ever known, in fact, by Armenians especially, and that is the Catholic Armenian network centered in Mount Lebanon and consisting of the Antonian congregation, or Andonians, Antonines, and the Zimmar congregation, both of them in Mount Lebanon on the mountains north of Beirut. So
and
all
Seville,
three,
the interrelationship of these networks.
they're all linked. The religious networks, obviously, the trade networks are all linked, and they're all linked in some ways by the third typology of the network that also gets short shrift in analytical studies or in studies of history, and that is what I would call credit networks. The networks of capital and money that flows across boundaries and frontiers, that travels great distances in great amounts of transactions that are facilitated through what historians call bills of exchange. These are sophisticated credit mechanisms that most merchants used in the early modern period, and Armenians were especially gifted at using these instruments to remit huge sums of money, as they do today, but in an age before the internet, before Interpol, before MoneyGrams, and so on.
Seville,
And
would you talk
the
about...
credit networks connected the two other networks.
So we've got the networks and we've got the mechanism, and that is the credit network. Would you talk about outcomes? An example of the output of these networks that led to cultural, national consolidation.
Sure. Well, I can say two things. One, the church, of course, the Armenian church at Sup Ejmiadzin was absolutely pivotal in all of this. Absolutely pivotal. Armenians are a religious nation and a confessional nation. They were a confessional nation before they became a secularized nation. So the church's role is not one that should be in any way underestimated. But the outcomes of these networks is your question. And the outcomes of these networks, in the early modern period at least, were to patronize and bankroll a cultural production in the diaspora in a state of dispersion and widespread scattering of Armenian communities, tiny as they were. And all of this all of these scattered communities were able to funnel huge amounts of capital that Armenian merchants had raised in long distance trade into the work of print capitalism, or printing, to be more precise, which produced a kind of cultural diasporic public sphere where Armenians communicated with one another and they disputed, rationally engaged in discourse, and so on. And the outcome of all this, the aim of all this, was to reconsolidate and reimagine a sense of our collective Armenianness in the diaspora in the early modern period, before the age of secularization, where Armenians could imagine themselves as a nation. But the argument in my next book is that the nation that they imagined was not a secular nation as we often think of these days, but a nation that was built, governed, and solidified by the confessional identity of the Armenians as members of the anti-Chalcedonian Armenian, now called Apostolic Church. So to do this, money was very important. You always follow the money trail in almost anything, and in my work, that's what I've been doing for 15 years. And to follow the money trail, you need to pay microscopic attention to the instruments with which Armenians scattered across the world, not knowing each other personal face-to-face often, still generated enough trust to remit huge sums of money for education, for cultural production, and so on. I'll give you two examples of very important institutions. The Mkhitarist Colegio Armeno, two examples. Colegio Armeno, founded by money from Madras, Catholic Armenian merchants, remitting that money through these complex mechanisms of exchange from Madras to Basra to Baghdad to Istanbul or Constantinople, and then finally to Venice. That happens through connected, as kind of like transnation that's connected through networks of credit. The same also applies for Zimmar and many other institutions as well. There's always money and patronage behind it. Yeah. The second one would be the Lazareth Institute, for instance, also founded by Julfan money, long-distance merchants. And again, in all these endowments, in Moscow, and one can also say in Zimmar as well, the school that they had in Zimmar, the seminary, which trained generations of students, was also founded by Catholic Armenian money coming from Madras. And again, the same channels, and often they're imbricated, they overlap, the Mkhitarist religious firm network and the Antonine religious firm network, the Zimmar religious firm network. They're all imbricated. They're all often of the same individuals moving between networks. So, and the same people who are facilitating the transfer of money.
I'm going to interrupt you and thank you and not give Viken and Shushan a chance to jump in because our next guest, Rupen Vartanyan, is at an airport waiting to get on a flight. But I want to say that I've taken two things away from what you've said. One is the degree of trust necessary and the skills necessary to navigate through these networks for a purpose. And the second is you talked about the creation of all of the printing hubs, but what you said was, and through these, it allowed Armenians to reimagine themselves as a nation. And I'm
as
taking...
a confessional nation, yes.
As a
non-territorial confessional nation bound to their apostolic church and imagining themselves as a confessional nation that differed starkly from other kinds of Christians. That's very important. All of that was secularized in the 19th century, but you needed to have the religious basis first.
I'll take it. Sebo Aslanyan, I know we asked you for something really tough, something that you don't like to do, and I hugely appreciate your agreeing to do this for us because I think this context and the lessons it holds, that was supposed to be my next question. Shushan wanted that question asked, and the lessons, but I'm just going to leave it out there for those who've heard. Thank you very much, Professor Sebo Aslanyan.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to move on really quickly to our next guest, Rupen Vartanyan, who can easily be introduced as a businessman, philanthropist, but that doesn't quite do justice to what he's done. He's a thinker and he's a persistent doer. He has created or co-created several initiatives aimed at, I would say, exactly this creation of a network nation. In the early 2000s, he and several partners worked on Armenia 2020, trying to focus on Armenia's choices for what it wants to be in the year 2020. Later, the Aurora Prize in 2014 was created, again, global focused, but predicated on appealing to a segment in diaspora that feels affinity with the Armenian nation without being committed to full participation. And then in 2016, the Global Armenian Concept, which got diverted because people talked about who signed on to it instead of its real intent, which was to embark on partnership and coordination among Armenian organizations and individuals for the advancement of Armenia. And finally this year, in between all of the family commitments to United World Colleges in Dilijan and the IDEA Foundation, which is part of the Rupen and Veronica Vartanyan Foundation projects, now he's moved on with partners to two new initiatives, Armenia 2041 and The Future Armenian. And I want to welcome Rupen Vartanyan, who is somewhere in Moscow in an airport ready to fly to Armenia. Rupen, welcome.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you for all the nice introduction. I'm happy to be part of this very important conversation.
Thank
and
you.
I'm very happy to listen to one of the most admired professor, which we use a lot his work in our book, what we doing with Nuna Alikan in Crossroads, but we use a lot of materials which was professor for all of us.
It's there for the taking, right? It's there for all of the examples.
Yes.
Rupen, I know we have 15 minutes before they call you away. Has the war made your efforts at this global future Armenian network, nation, all of the adjectives together, has the war made your work easier or harder?
I will say easier, because you can connect people only in the two options. One, when you're proud, or fear. And the fear, it's today create, I think, necessity for all of us to think differently about our network and our really advantages to be dispersed around the world. And I hope with this very painful, tragic events what happened with all of us, create more opportunity for people realize how it's important to build a network nation and use one of the major advantage and competitive advantage, our human resources that we have worldwide. Because before we can talk about Armenian diaspora, Armenian experience in the middle years, but if we're talking about today reality, and one of the points of 15 points that we mentioned in our future Armenian, thinking about the truth, not about myths and illusions. We don't have a network nation, it's illusion. In Glendale today, Armenians from Soviet Armenia and Armenians from Beirut or Armenians from Iran not interact with each other. They don't know each other. I think it would be good, Salpi, to do the survey. How many people out of your community you know who living in the same place where you are, and how much you interact with each other?
Good question.
And I think this was, Professor Slayan mentioned very correctly, it was religion or commercial interest that makes it unified. It don't exist. I will say my example with Nubar Afeyan is one of the exceptional examples of people who were not born in the same place. We didn't know each other before we started our working together. And I think it was a very good example of something which unfortunately is very rare happening in Armenia and Armenian world. But
So
I think the
what
war
is
has
it?
helped us.
And I'm sorry, you said the war helped us.
The war helped us because people now from different background, and I agree with Shashank, it doesn't matter it's Hayastansi or Libanansi or Syriaci or Fransatsi Armenians, we realize we need to help Armenia because Armenia was in a dangerous situation. And I think they're realizing the failed state situation we are facing today, failed state situation in Armenia, and realizing that our nation is in danger to disappear in historical land that we've been living thousands of years. I think it's create emergency situation with all of us to think differently.
Viken, do you want to jump in?
Yes, my question would be, we have two huge challenges. One is what you just called failed state situation in Armenia, but also we have weakened diaspora communities. The network that Sebu just talked about is not there, is not as efficient. We do have the network, but it's not as efficient as it was in the 16th, 17th centuries. So where to start?
The irony of what you just said is not missed on anyone, huh? These networks today are not as efficient as they were in the 16th, 17th centuries. Somebody get that on Twitter, please.
It's true. It's true. I agree with you, Big M. And I think we need to start with why in our 15 points, one of the points to create strong institutions in diaspora is the same, equally important compared to fixing the failed state situation in Armenia. I think in both places we are situation. One thing which we need to also acknowledge honestly, we are not only have a failed state or weak diaspora institution, we overall have no institution member or respect to institutions because
and trust.
And trust. And it's a
state mentality, thinking about a state. Yeah,
thinking about it. It's not only about government officials. It's a nation overall attitude to the state, which was all been foreigners, and the institutions of diaspora basically mostly was organized around to keeping the culture heritage, their religion heritage, but not to building the commercial network. And today, unfortunately, after 30 years of independence of Armenia, We don't see a lot Armenian projects was built by network, which can benefit for having people from different part of the world working together. And I think we have a few examples, exceptional examples in technology area in businesses, but it's very few examples, unfortunately. And people, what Salpi mentioned, the trust is one of the key elements. Not only trust to the institutions, not only trust to the government, trust to each other. Because despite we're all Armenians, we don't have any more common religion ground which helped us before. We don't have a language which helped us because Russian Armenian don't speak English or speak a little bit, and Armenians from Armenia speak in Western and Eastern Armenia. Again, we have a mess with languages, and we have a mess with the culture, we have with behavior, which creating very big issues and barriers for doing something together.
Well, before Shushan disagrees with you, I want to disagree with you for just a minute, because I think those differences are minor. It's the mindset to tolerate and accept those differences that is major. But Shushan, I'm sure you want to jump in.
So one comment, Ruben, I think you could be a little more hopeful about Glendale and interactions within certain sub-ethnic communities. I agree with you that the first generation doesn't do it so much, but second generation, those Iranian Armenian, Lebanese Armenian, Hayastan Armenians, those differences are slowly fading away because of more important shared characteristics. So I think we can be a little hopeful, but I agree with you that this is something really interesting to investigate. I have a question I've thought about a lot every time I've heard you introduce your project. I think one thing we haven't talked about that's so important to the work you do is that it's always vision oriented. And I think sometimes or often people have a hard time understanding your vision because it's looking ahead. It's not looking back. It's not treating a crisis now. You're always looking ahead. Why do you think it's so hard to communicate your vision? Or the concept of a vision in general?
We are the best nation in the world, and I'm sure Professor Sebu will confirm it. We are survivors. We are very good survivors. When you're in survivor mood, you cannot think long term. You have a basturma, you have a lavash, you have a haurma, you have your food is showing what we are mentality is a very short term. Today, 1 kopek better to 5 rubles or $5 tomorrow, because again, we don't know where we'll be living tomorrow. It's why, again, unfortunately, with survivor mood, which we have a survival DNA, what we have in our blood, it's helping us to make something amazing to keep our existence in thousands of years, but at the same time creating this lot of challenge about how you can think long term, how you can think big, how you can think really out of the box, because it's creating dangers of being too much optimistic, too much. That's why when we talk about our project, we always realize one of the biggest challenges, people don't believe it can be realistic. And look, surprisingly, we are talking now 2021, and exactly 20 years ago with Nubar and Pierre Gurjan, Andrea, we started in Gordon Abet and many others. We started this project Armenia 2020. Now we can look back, and we did it, by the way, with McKinsey. We will publish the results, how we've been right or wrong when we talk about the future of Armenia 20 years ago, what we've been achieved, what was not been achieved. But you're right, it's a very difficult approach, which most of Armenians cannot accept because they don't live this type of the attitude. But I think without this important question, how we see our future, what is the future of Armenian state, what is the future of Armenian nation, what is the common for all of us, not only genocide but something else, we cannot build successful state, we cannot build successful nation. I'm sure about it, I'm confident.
A colleague at USC recently turned me on to this. I had no idea. This is a Danish politician philosopher said 150 years ago, after Denmark lost very badly to Germany, lost territory, lost the war, and this is what has driven Danish domestic and foreign policy for 150 years. What was outwardly lost shall be inwardly won.
Great.
And this is an intrinsic part of Danish policy, and it builds on what you just said. That is the will and the confidence to push forward with those same survival instincts. Through your projects, you do a couple of different things. One of them is, as much as you've talked about diaspora institutions, state relationships, but your projects, particularly Aurora, for example, even now with Future Armenian, you are aiming for the affinity diaspora, not just the committed down the road connected diaspora. You are really aiming for those on the fringes, kind of putting their toes in the water. Why are you investing energy there where most people don't?
I think one of the most dangerous elements that we didn't touch a lot, but we are losing Armenians not only from Armenia, but more importantly, we're losing Armenians from diaspora, and this is forever. That's why I thought it would be critical for all of us, what we've been doing, to try to find a way how we can re-engage people who didn't feel that we are part of Armenian community outside of Armenia, and they felt we don't want to associate with the mediocre country, we don't want to associate with the failed state, we don't want to associate with the country or nation who has no big dreams. And I can see one of our challenges: without big dreams, without big projects, without real ambition element, not only about us, but also how what we are giving to the world, how we can be interesting to the world, not only because we are first Christian nation or because we have a genocide, but because today we're doing projects like Tumo or something else, which really we cannot re-engage with people back. And I thought like people like Lord Darcy or Pierre Gurjan or Andrei Alian, who had not been in Armenia before we started working with our projects, it really was important for them to see what we are doing is not only relevant to Armenians, but also relevant to the world. I think it was one of the important elements. We're too self-concentrated about our own problems, we're too concentrated about our own issues only, because when you're a victim, when you're thinking about only about your problems, you cannot help, and you cannot think about other nations, you cannot think about what's happening in the world. But this has become unavoidable. If we want to be relevant to the world, we need to think about what we can do, not only what we can receive, what people obliged to help us, what people obliged to recognize the genocide or whatever, but also what we can give back to the other nations, other states, which I think was very critical for us. And I want to remind everybody, when talking about 7 million Armenians in diaspora, it's illusion. It's one of the myths also we need to. It's a 7 million Armenians origin people, but only 1.5 million, no more, been in Armenia at least once. And we're talking about disengaged 4.5 million Armenians who've never been in Armenia or a very little touch with Armenians. Why? We're talking about, very proud about 10 million Armenians worldwide, but most of these people never been in Armenia or don't feel what they are Armenian. This needs to be also, we need to do better survey and better, and I'm very thankful for the Gulbenkian Foundation is doing, but again, it's a deep work needs to be done because we have illusion. For example, we did a survey in Krasnodar in the south of Russia. It's 4 different Armenian diasporas. They don't interact with each other the same way like in Glendale. Because Hamshetsi Armenians, we don't interact with the Harabakhsi Armenian, and we both don't interact with the Soviet Armenians. And Russian Armenians who have been living there 400 years or 300 years don't interact with each other. And it's amazing to see how 4 Armenian diasporas living in the same region in south of Russia don't interact with each other. They interact with other nations better compared with us. And most of them never been in Armenia, and it's the south of Russia. We're not talking about the United States, we're talking about south of Russia. It's 1 hour flight from Sochi to Armenia. Most Armenians are living in Krasnodar, which is around close to 1 million people, never been in Armenia. Can you imagine this?
Salki, I know we're out of time. Can I ask one quick question?
If his plane will wait, it's okay with me.
Yes. Yeah, I have 10 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, we've got 5.
I know.
Good.
In the simplest terms, for everyone who's watching, young and old, connected or not connected, who or what is the future Armenian?
And then Viken, you go next, and we'll move forward. Rupen Vartanyan.
Okay. I'm a strong believer that we have a great opportunity to build one of the most important success stories for the world, not only for Armenians, to find a way how the network and the institution can have a peace and work together and not fight against each other like happened in 9/11 in the United States or what's happened in January 8 when the Twitter switch off the President of the United States. Because I think one of the critical challenges with the all-around world is facing is how the network and institutions can operate together. It's an important element which we can do together, and I think it's a new type of the public contract which needs to create between the state, the people who live in Armenia, the diaspora, and Artsakh, because it was broken contract which we had during last couple of years because of the different issues happened in the history of Armenian state and Armenian nation. I don't want to go back, but looking forward, I'm a strong believer the future Armenian, if we can really touch these 15 points about being honest about what we are talking, being based by fact but not illusions, try to build a efficient government and official institutions diaspora, to rebuild the diaspora and Armenian relationships, and to really think about how we can not just have a good economy, but really jump from small size economy to different level, and we can really build best education, rebuild the education for Armenian nations back, and rebuild this science, technology, and creativity which we lost during the last 30 years. To really go from agriculture, trading country to the country which based a nation based on education, technology, science, and creativity. I think we will become again relevant for the Armenians in Armenia. Armenians are southern, but also will become relevant to the world, because I am quite confident you cannot be successful building your zoo, just building some special close place, but you just stay yourself without being interactive with the world. But at the same time, I believe we need to make a lot of investment to keep our identity and try to keep our culture heritage, keep our memory about what we have with us, but looking forward, not backwards, and looking forward with the not just dreaming, but really have an ambitious plan that can be realized only together. And I'm quite confident today is a unique opportunity to us, I'm just finishing, a unique opportunity for all of us, because of the failing and failed state, because of the loss of the war. Emergency will push us to make better changes compared to any time else. That's why it will not use this momentum. It will be very bad for all our nation, because the next 6 months we have a window to really make significant changes in the future of Armenia and Armenian nation.
Viken, do you want to top that?
Very quickly, I think it's extremely important to think about Russian Armenians. It's important because of their numbers. Probably 2.5 million Armenians, ethnic Armenians live in Russia. But also they live in a country which is central to the present and the future security and survival and well-being of Armenians. They live in Russia. Still, they are an enigma to many of us. Ruben, can you say something about the role of the Russian Armenians in this imagined network nation? What is their role? What is their place?
And Rupen Vartanyan, 2 minutes.
Okay, I will be very quick. I would say we believe without 50,000 families coming back to Armenia, we cannot change anything. And I believe it's 50,000 families we need to go back to Armenia, which we will start a special campaign. Most people will come from Russia, because it will be an important element to change the mentality of Armenians living in Armenia, bring people who is not so far from the mentality, but also at the same time bring different attitude. The second point, I would say, Russian Armenians facing very serious challenge, because they also have a very weak institutions themselves, and we are facing some big challenge how we can operate in an empire who today is not very welcome to any national institutions. And we need to understand, if we want to build strong defense or strong security system for Armenia, and Russia needs to treat us like a fair partner, we need to become strong ourselves. We cannot expect that the Russian will help us. We cannot expect the Russian will do for everything for us. And I think this attitude to just asking help without giving something back is over. So the only way Russian Armenians can benefit from all what's happening today, if they can really will commit more to go back to Armenia, but also to build a strong Armenia, because otherwise the weak Armenia is destroying their future also. Because now, I don't want to remind everybody, not only 2.5 million Armenians live in Russia, but it's around 2 million Azeris live in Armenia, in Russia now, which is never existed before, so big community of Azeris living in Russia, and they're becoming very influential. So why weak Armenia is hurting not only Armenians in Armenia, it's hurting Armenians who live in Russia very significantly. So why we need to understand this is the call for everyone, and this is the emergency call for Russian Armenians the same way like Armenians in Armenia.
Worst part of this job is having to say, I'm sorry, we've got to move on. But Rupen Vartanyan, we're grateful for your insights and for making the time to participate and share your insights with this broad community. Thank you, and I know we'll be speaking again.
Thank you, and good luck, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Like I said, the good and the difficult. This is a perfect jumping point, really, to our next guest. Karini Rose Mgrdician, who is one of the young voices who became visible, vocal during and after the war. She has graduated from Dartmouth College, where she studied theater, public policy, and film. What a neat combination. She is an artist, an activist, an educator, and co-founder of the Yerazad Coalition. Yeraz Azad, get it? I want to welcome Karin Immigrate.
Hello.
Hi.
Happy
Thanks
to
for
be
joining
here.
us. Thank you.
Of course.
And you know, Yeraz Azad can't get better. Free dreams are good things. Look, we've got just a few minutes to talk about both who you are and what you do. And the networks that we're speaking about are, you know, they're internal networks, but they're also networks that extend beyond the Armenian world. And you are part of this new cohort of Armenians who are both Armenian and also globally active. So tell us about where you see your place in this network nation of ours.
Yeah, so it was very interesting listening to all of that, because I feel like I myself am, I would be seen by many as an exception, because I am half Black, half Armenian. I grew up here in Los Angeles in the diaspora. I don't speak Armenian, but I am currently learning. But I am someone who has been very active as long as I can be for our community and for our cause. But I also am someone who is marginalized in our community. So it was only recently that I felt like my voice was valued within this community, because I've experienced a lot of racism within the Armenian community as well. And just those questions of, do I even have a right to speak to this? But I decided to put that aside and put in work, because I'm someone who has always put in work for a number of causes, for the Black Lives Matter movement as well. And I've noticed this gap within the Armenian community in being very insular and expecting other communities and expecting everyone to know what's happening in Armenia, to know what's happening when we have a media that doesn't cover everything that happens and that chooses to both sides the issue all the time. I'm lucky that I grew up in LA near Glendale, where there's a very big and strong, powerful Armenian community. But I've also spent time in other places. My mom is from Chicago. I lived over there. Not a big Armenian community. I went to college in New Hampshire. There were only a couple of us. So not everyone has access to this information about our community. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say you're a representative of this Armenian by choice new world of ours. I know Shushan wants to jump in.
Karini, I keep thinking about what Khachik Talilian writes a lot about, right? That young diasporan Armenians are looking for more than the checklist that we're used to, right? The Armenian heritage, the language, the religion, and so on there. And it's interesting that it all comes together, right? With what Seppu was talking about, with what Ruben was talking about, integrating the Armenian story into the world story, that Armenians don't live in a bubble of their own, in a zoo of their own, right? So why is this, what's so attractive for your generation about this, right? What triggered your engagement? I know you talked about, was it COVID that these digital spaces opened up? What was it exactly, the kind of moment or the instant or the awakening that triggered your engagement?
Yeah, I've always been engaged in the issue, but as far as with everything that was happening recently, up until now, it's seen that the Armenian community has been very single issue focused for the most part in the diaspora. It's very much Armenian genocide recognition. And that translates to a lot of our policy and lobbying groups. It's very much like, we will support any politician as long as they're supporting us. It's that whole idea. And I think what you're seeing with my generation, and it's interesting that you brought up COVID, because I do feel like that had an effect on the way everyone was able to connect across states, across the entire world, the entire diaspora, because we were on social media and finding ways to support the homeland, coming up with, like, I organized a bunch of like emailing campaigns, and through Yerazad we've founded like different coalitions in states all across the country, and that is made up of Armenians of all different backgrounds. We've got our Hayastansis, our Bartskahais, like everyone, but also some people who are not Armenian, who want to help, who want to join us, who are like, is it okay if I join and I help share information? I'm like, yes, we want more people to be involved, because when you build these coalitions of solidarity and you're genuinely showing up for other people, you're not expecting this sort of idea of transactional activism that we see. And
you're essentially defining network. You're saying the network is both bringing people in and we going out, that the network is this two-way path. Viken?
Yeah, I have two questions. Selfie called you Armenian by choice. So the first question is, why did you choose this Armenian identity? And what is the Armenian identity that you chose? Because probably the way the Armenian identity you chose is different from the choice of others.
And you get just a couple of minutes for these
sorry.
big questions. And when I said Armenian by choice, I mean this for your whole generation, huh? I don't just mean it for you. Your whole generation is choosing to be engaged.
Yeah, for me, I've always grown up really knowing who I am and knowing that my great-grandparents survived the genocide, and I know all of their stories, so I never felt like I had the right to not honor my ancestors and honor everything that they've been through on both sides of myself, my Black family as well. But I think for some of us who come from backgrounds like mine, and people who I've talked to who feel comfortable reaching out to someone like me who has also been marginalized in our community, they don't necessarily feel comfortable choosing to be Armenian. And obviously they are Armenian, but choosing to be a part of our community because of things that they've experienced. But I feel like with all of these new organizations that are popping up that are more inclusive of Armenians who are mixed race, Armenians who are LGBTQ+, Armenians who come from, I've been talking to a lot of Armenians who are from, originally their family was from Baku, and they've sometimes not felt because of their names, and they haven't felt accepted. Turkish Armenians haven't felt accepted. So there are a lot of people who now, I think the spark was seeing what was happening in Artsakh this last time and seeing that it's never really ended. Even though we have Armenia and we have a homeland, it can be taken away. And we all feel a responsibility to do what we can, even when we're far away. And we kind of, I think our generation has this understanding that no action is too small. And we have reach in our own communities because a lot of us in the diaspora are part of other communities and groups and have friends who are of other backgrounds. And we can connect the struggles because it's all interconnected. When you're struggling against colonialism and white supremacy, it's all connected. So that's one beautiful thing that I've seen is there have been conversations I've had with people who are Tongva here in LA who are indigenous. And they've connected a lot of what they experienced to what Armenians have experienced in losing our homeland as well. And I think we should be making those connections, especially those of us in the diaspora who are now using the term indigenous and indigeneity, but we have to acknowledge that we ourselves are occupying indigenous land. If you're in the United States or Canada or Australia, if you're a diasporan Armenian in one of those places, you have to acknowledge that as well. So I think we're definitely seeing a shift, and we're seeing it spread to all generations in our community. Everyone's minds are opening, and it's really beautiful to see. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, don't apologize at all. I'm just grateful that you further complicated all of the questions at hand, because that just makes this even better. Adding to the questions is the best thing you can do. Karina Rose Mugardician, you're wonderful, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to build on this. I mean, it's all one continuous arc. Our next guest, Hampartsum Kakhetyan, to say that he is a representative of Armenia's new tech geniuses is to undersell him. He is an innovative thinker, an action-oriented leader in the tech ecosystem, and he's an example of life in the network nation. When you speak with him, you've got to first find out what time zone he's in. He runs, co-founded the venture capital firm SmartGate VC, which is a Silicon Valley pre-seed venture capital fund backed by Tim Draper and a network of entrepreneurs and professionals from across the US, Europe, the Middle East, North Africa. And their key focus is deep tech. It's artificial intelligence, it's emerging computational biotech, it's the Internet of Things. And he is engaged in all of this, again, throughout Armenia, New York City, here in Los Angeles, Eastern Europe. This is a capital fund on a mission to discover and back up, as they say, visionary and unbreakable entrepreneurs and help them disrupt the status quo. Hampartsum's and SmartGate's work goes beyond backing entrepreneurs. It starts with backing entrepreneurs way at the beginning of the process. They're deep into offering space to learn and to do and even to fail. And one of his achievements is the establishment of the first master's program in machine learning years ago. I want to welcome him and put him on the spot because a lot of what he says and thinks and writes is really a follow-up to many of the things that Rupen Vartanyan has been saying. He is also part of a recent public-private partnership in Glendale, California, where SmartGate VC has partnered with the city of Glendale to establish Hero House and offer education, startup, and support services to the young tech community here. Hampartsum Karketsyan, welcome.
Thank you, Salvi. I'm very touched with the introduction. So it was a long one. Thank you.
It was a long one. I figured I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and you would never do it this way, so I wanted to do it. Hampartsum, you're committed to this concept of Armenians being part of a network global nation. Resilience, inspiration, all of this has been ascribed to this nation. And if we don't follow that, otherwise what you have said and written is that the choice is that trauma is going to continue to eat us up as a population, regardless of where we live. So you know what this conversation has been today, establishing networks both within and with the world. Is that a fair way to talk about this network nation direction, that it's really two networks, a broader internal network and a network that's global with other nations and professional entities?
Okay, so look. So first, I want to mention that when I see these two words together, network, nation, these two words are really interesting, but also maybe contradictory to some extent. Maybe they are to me and to my generation, and the generation will follow. Because when I see the word network, it's about connection, it's about bridges. When I see the word nation, it started as a uniting concept, like few hundred years ago. But now nations, they seem to be more about exclusiveness to me, for example. So nations, so it seems there's a wall, I'm this nation, you are that nation, etc. Right? So that's why maybe there's some contradiction. And let me also add to it that if you look at at what's happening in TikTok, right? So one of the young social networks out there, these are people who are united with joint topics, causes, and it's a massive group. And now when you when you see these teenagers in the future, maybe 20, 40 years from now, they are going to drive the world, right? And now coming to the concept of nation, maybe it's somehow outdated. And imagine imagine there's a competitive and a very productive network. Maybe it started with Armenians, maybe with some Armenian participation. But what really matters is whether this network is going to create a value, whether it's capable and whether it is actually creating value. If it is, then we have something to offer to the world, right? And if we create a value, then the conversations can start about some exchange of value, right? About finding our place in the global value chain.
Maybe it's the state that is limiting, but the nation can be extended and expanded?
Maybe I don't know how it will evolve, right? So like we are dealing with a like big number of possibilities out there, like in the future. But the point I want to make basically is, so if we talk about network, to me, how you are joining the network, so whether the ethnicity is a component for you to join the network, I see it's very obsolete. I see it's very obsolete, but whether this network can create the value, can share the value, can you contribute to the network, and there's a proper value exchange between you and the network and the other members of the network. This is what really cares to me. This is what really matters to me. And now, if we, as let's say Armenians, we start like a network, or we are in some sort of network already, and there are many networks, and networks, there are networks of networks, these diasporas, there's also networks, they're part of some network. So and this can go and go on and on. But if there is of something that touches the majority of the group, the majority of networks, diasporas, if that topic creates value, so then we have something to offer. If it's not, then we are very, very sorry about it.
Viken, if the network creates
yes,
value.
Please. Sebo just told us that the network we had in the past had clear value creation. They were merchants, they were bankers, they were religious network. So where's the value that brings in to our network today, and especially in the future? Where do you see that?
So to me, something to work, so there should be economic, in fundamentals, there should be some economic value. Like if we come up with a model which makes it beneficial, economically beneficial to part of the network, so people will come. So in my opinion, there should be some economic benefit for joining the network, or maybe status, or whatever, something that people can gain, and it can be substantial. So when we talk about Armenia as a country, so it's one of 193 unique entities in the UN, right? So it's a country which has equal status with 192 others. And if we can focus our efforts towards building Armenia as a country, Armenia, let's say by choice. So we were talking about Armenians by choice, right? So it's more like identity. From self-identification, a concept from there. But if we talk about there's something very special, and only 193 are out there. And now, if we can build around it something that can benefit, let's say 1 billion people, why Armenia can't have 1 billion consumers, right? Because if I'm citizen of Armenia, I'm paying my taxes, I'm subscribed with my taxes, paying monthly to some specific services, right? I'm subscribed to educational insurance, I'm subscribed to healthcare insurance, security, safety, and I'm paying monthly fee for it. Like I'm paying to Google for cloud, right? And now if there is this kind of service provider, which can provide services to billion people, why this billion people cannot subscribe to Armenia as a choice? Why Armenia cannot be their place by choice, Armenia by choice, right? And because one of the possibilities that I see from today's perspective, in the future, Armenia, the world in 20, 30 years, 50 years from now, these countries will be competing for us, for the citizens, for tax residents. And there will be in my opinion, something I can subscribe for my healthcare insurance to Germany, and if there are any issues, so Germany will take care of it. I can subscribe my educational guarantees, insurance, or whatever service, like in some other country, like Singapore. I can subscribe my security service, like my security insurance, to a private company. If there is something, they will send a helicopter to save me and my family. So if you see the taxes I'm paying from that perspective, and there are billions of people who will be consuming similar services, and we are putting this into fundament of building a country which will provide services to billions of people, the economic opportunities can be huge. Even if we get like few 10 millions Armenians by choice, that would be huge.
Before I ask Shushan to jump in, I just want to say that I know that many people who are following and listening are saying, you know, we've got tomorrow's problems here and look at where he's going. But what I want to note is that, you know, when we spoke about crises, especially in the second episode of this series, when we talked about demography, when we talked about the, you know, security and the economic issues and all of the environmental issues, that answers to a lot of those crises lay in these out-of-the-box, truly 21st century structures and formulas, and not necessarily in trying to resolve them the way they were resolved in the 20th century. That is, the answer to demographic crisis may not be give more kids if a family has, give more money if a family has 3 kids. The solution really may be bring in more people into the country, Armenia by choice. I mean, you're taking these crises and looking for answers way out of the usual box. I just kind of want to bring people back down to that level. Shushan, you've got just a couple more minutes. This is what I do in life, it seems.
I just want to make an observation that usually the identity talk is a talk that's consumed and produced by diasporans, right? Because we have this identity issue. And usually you don't hear Hayastansis, right? Folks born and raised in Armenia talking about our identity because they take it for granted, because it's default. So it's interesting for me to watch you use Armenian by choice, but in a very different way. Just like you said, it's not necessarily ethnic affiliation, but maybe civic affiliation. So I just want to put that out there for everyone to think about. I'm curious, Hambartsum, as someone who represents these tech networks, what are your networks based on? If it's not ethnic affiliation, and you talked about value, but can you articulate when you join or create networks, they are based on what characteristics? What's important for you?
And Hambartsum, you have exactly 2 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I think it's about execution, about adding value. Depending on the network I'm joining, like each network has sort of its manifesto. And whether I'm contributing to the manifesto, to the goals, to the mission of the network, if I'm contributing, I sort of like get some reputation points. Let's say it's a gamify the process, right? I'm contributing, I'm mining, I'm getting some coins, and then I can spend these coins. I can reach out to different people and ask for favors. I'm contributing to the network. Okay, I'm using the resources of the network. I'm not contributing to the network. Okay, I don't have coins. Okay, no one will sell me whatever they sell in that network. Like a
And de facto, you're absolutely answering the question when people say, you know, call on the international community. If you're not there, part of that segment of the international community, giving and participating.
Accumulating coins from the game.
Exactly, which is what Karini said a little while ago, right? That, you know, if you're not there, then you're not there. I mean, so the gamifying is formulaic response to what actually does in fact happen in international organizations, international community all over the place. So thank you for putting it in your generations and 21st century.
By the way, if I have
parlance.
if I have 1 minute, I want to add the point about, okay, we have this demographic issue and this guy is talking about moon out there. Okay, so like you do basic, very simple portfolio diversification, right? You put 80% of your assets into solving let's say into low risk for investments, etc. And you allocate this 5% or whatever of your assets into these moonshot projects. Okay, if you allocate this 5% of your assets or whatever into moonshot projects, like the return can be like very dramatic in a good way. And if you lose this 5%, nothing catastrophic will happen actually.
And I think what makes your generation so special is this willingness to fail, right? The projects to shoot to the moon, you're willing to test some of those out. And it's okay if you fail.
Look, if you fail for outside world with your project one, you get a lot of experience, and the chances of success of your project too will be much higher. So like, there's no like failing as something like bad or stigmatic. Like failing is an experience. Okay, that's fine. You fail, you learn. Now you are more competitive, more productive. If you failed, of course, for good reasons, like if you were hardworking, etc.
It hurts, but it's okay. And if we want to take pride in the resilience description that the nation uses, then that's where the resilience comes in. Diversify your efforts in very different directions. Համբարձում Քաղքեցյան, I hope this will not be the last time we talk about these issues and listen to your just thought-provoking approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing the amazing job you do.
Thank you. Very grateful. We've saved Mr. Arman Tatoyan to the end for many reasons, because it too is the best possible way to ground us all, the audience. Mr. Tatoyan is the Ombudsman of the Republic of Armenia. That is, he is the human rights defender, and as I said at the top, he has been one of the most articulate, focused voices during this post-war crisis period, especially these days. Mr. Tatoyan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I know we've been around the world and back, and I know that you've listened to parts of this. First, again, thank you, given everything that's happening. Please help us understand what is happening. What is the situation at the border? What is the situation with the prisoners of war? And then finally, in the time that we have left, where does, in your opinion, where do diaspora network nation characteristics fit in what needs to be done?
Thank you very much, Salve, for inviting me to this very important event, and it was an honor for me to join you. And of course, it was a pleasure to listen to such very important speeches and reports. When it comes to the situation here in Armenia, well, I have to say that since the end of hostilities, Armenia has been facing human rights challenges in the human rights area related to the security, to the prisoners of war. Of course, I have to highlight also the issue related to our compatriots in Artsakh. But since I will focus, given the topic, I will focus on these two main issues. As you know, after the war, Azerbaijani military forces appeared as a result of ethnic cleansing and genocidal policy. They appeared next to our villages. They appeared on the roads connecting communities of Sunni with each other and in several places. And since then, our fact-finding mission of the Human Rights Defender apparently shows that we revealed many provocations from their side. And because of their presence, rights of our border residents, first of all, and of course, but rights of our citizens in general were violated, and they still are violated. I mean, first of all, right to property, right to use pastures. So, in other words, saying socioeconomic rights, because many people who live in bordering areas, they just lost their lands. By the way, these are lands even that belong to them based on the cadastral documentation provided by the Armenian authorities. And apart from that, in Syunik and Arkonik already, because of their illegal presence, our compatriots, they just cannot use, for example, shepherds cannot use pastures. Apart all of this, there are also cases when people lost their houses. Even we have cases, for example, in the village of Shurnukh in Goris, when a house of a person, of a villager, is divided into two parts. One is so-called Azerbaijan, the other part is so-called Armenia. So that is why this the process after the work, this is another stage of, let's say, human rights violations, which causes tension. Also, apparently, it contributes to the tension in our society. And as you know, and of course we have also shootings, by the way, periodically, and we had them after the war immediately. And as you know, on May 12th and May 13th, This year, Azerbaijani military criminally, let's say, I would say, illegally made an incursion inside the territory of Armenia from Syunik and Gegharkunik provinces. And because of their presence, again, this is not just a breach of territorial integrity of Armenia, but it already caused human rights gross violations, and they were evoking blatantly on some maps, fake maps, openly. And that is why I put forward, and I'm now developing with my office a concept, specific concept, where we're writing a specific concept on creating, on a necessity, absolute necessity of a security zone around Gegharkunik and Syunik. And we are also analyzing international experience. So when it comes to prisoners of war,
before the prisoners of war, who are your interlocutors? Who do you work with in order for such a security zone to even have a future?
Well, first of all, of course, I'm not very such a naive person to think that tomorrow the security zone will be created. But what I'm doing, I think, what is the most valuable thing, that we are putting concrete facts, concrete violations, cases, as justification for the security zone. And by the way, we found many experiences in the world, cases when a security zone was created. By the way, it will not be, according to my concept, it will not be on the territory of Armenia, but it means that Azerbaijani military, there's signs and there's flags, because they have also here flags and their signs, which they put, I think, intentionally to intimidate our people, to use it as a kind of good cause for them to locate their military personnel, to protect their signs and flags from our people, which is, of course, crazy. I think not at least a reason, but at least they use it for this purpose. So, and this means apparently that they should be removed from here, from their locations that are now, because there has been no demarcation or delimitation official process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It means that they cannot claim that this is their territory. So consequently, we have to put the human being, the person, in the center, and to build upon based on this concept, based on the human rights of the person, and we are now basing our concept on international standards.
So in essence, this post-war situation continues to be a confrontational one rather than one where through some sort of collaborative effort we would be on some road to coexistence. Viken, do you want to jump in? Or should we go on to POWs?
Yeah, my question would be, do you have contacts on the other side of the border, individuals, lawyers, or groups who are also worried about questions of human rights and rule of law, with whom you can work to push the issue of security of civilians, whether these civilians are located today on the Armenian side of the border or on the other side of the border?
You mean international community?
No, Azerbaijan.
No, I mean.
Azerbaijan. You mean well, unfortunately, I don't think that anyone can find a lawyer in Azerbaijan who is independent, who at least can express things that are different from the government. They are either in prisons or outside of that country. My main interlocutor was supposed to be maybe was supposed to be the Human Rights Commissioner. This is the title of the office of the Ombudsman there, the Human Rights Commissioner. But I have to say that in difference, first of all, in difference with us, we have an A status, international recognition of independence. They have B status, which means the international community does not recognize them as independent institution, and they behave themselves as part of the government. And even once, when I was presenting my report to the parliament, and I answered to one of the questions of the parliamentarians, whether I'm ready for the meeting. I said, yes, I'm ready it was before the war even, but right after my response, it was one or two sentences. The ombudsperson of Azerbaijan disseminated even immediately a press release saying that I organized a cheap show in the parliament, that she will think about the possibility of meeting me if I convince our authorities to deoccupy Artsakh, let's say. So, of course, and I made another statement, and the international community knows about this, but this is a human rights person. Moreover, I will bring one more example. All of us, you know about the case of Rami Safarov, right? When he killed Gurgen Markaryan in Budapest. So when he was extradited to return to and was released in Azerbaijan, in Baku, the Human Rights Commissioner of Azerbaijan went to see Rami Safarov, and you know what she said? These words are documented and confirmed by the European Court. She said that Rami Safarov should serve as an exemplary model for the youth of Azerbaijan. So in these conditions, I have no interlocutors in Azerbaijan with whom I could work, but I'm ready, you know, I'm ready. I'm an independent human rights person. I'm ready to work, but I have also I raised also another very important condition,
POWs.
so that they have also not only POWs, but also participation of the Artsakh ombudsman, because this is about human rights. It has, we don't care about politics, and this is what they do not accept, never ever, and they are in one shoes with the government, in one line. Even sometimes when you read the letters of the ombudsman and the Ministry of Defense, if you remove the sign, I mean, who is the author, then one can hardly differentiate whether this is Ministry of Defense or this is Human Rights Ombudsman. By the way, they filed an official complaint against me, against our activities, to the UN and Council of Europe, related to, interestingly formulated, they formulated official press release, related to the Armenian Ombudsman's activities in the region. So they kind of raised also our level, made it regional, which is good.
Can you address the situation of POWs? Because I think that's on top of everybody's mind.
Well, the Azerbaijani authorities, apparently they are artificially delaying the process of release and return of POWs. By the way, we're not talking about POWs, but also civilian captives. And there have been so many manipulations. At the beginning, they were saying that they have terrorists, which are only our citizens from Chirag, who were captured near Khatabert, let's say. But now they claim that everyone in Azerbaijan, every Armenian, everyone or all of them are terrorists. They have no POWs anymore. All of them are terrorists. They came to kill Azerbaijani population, etc. But this is apparently a manipulation because, first of all, from the standpoint of international humanitarian law, there is still an ongoing conflict. There are no hostilities, yes, but there is an armed conflict. And the international humanitarian law does mean that these people should be released and returned immediately after the hostilities. But what they do, they launch criminal proceedings, they start trials, and they start like criminal investigations against them, which is in gross violation of international humanitarian law. Very important thing is that they use the issue of prisoners of war for political purposes.
Domestic?
For bargaining.
Or bargaining?
No, bargaining for example, to have control over some territories. For example, there were several publications, credible publications, that they wanted control over the village Shosh, which leads to the city of Shushi, from Artsakh authorities. Or they may use this issue during negotiations, etc., other issues. But by this, they're causing mental suffering to our society, especially to the families of prisoners of war, and not only to them, but also to families of missing persons, because they are not releasing the exact number, how many prisoners of war and civilian captives they have in Azerbaijan, which means that many parents of missing persons, they still hope that their sons, their brothers are in captivity in Azerbaijan, and their situation is even worse if we compare with those who, at least whose captivities are confirmed.
After all this, it seems gratuitous to ask, in the context of Network Nation, What is it that you wish existed to make your job easier?
Given also the very important discussions that I witnessed and I was listening, I think we have to use our powerful diaspora, first of all, not to allow Azerbaijani authorities to spread fake information and false information about the real situation on the ground. Because this is in their interests to show to the world that everything is perfect. We live already in heaven. There are no violations. There is nothing. We are now ready to cooperate, to work, to reach peace, to work towards this, let's say, goal. But Armenians do not want peace. And what they do, they leave the responsibility for the peace on us, which is a real problem. This is not true. They are still given the parallel policy of deep hate speech, deep Armenophobia, amounting to fascism. And when you have every day almost these provocations against our nations, all these tensions, I cannot imagine how peace here can be reached. Only at the expense of our dignity and rights? No, of course. For example, Council of Europe, I was in Moscow very recently. There were some high-level representatives of the Council of Europe. They raised the issue of peace-building measures, so-called confidence-building measures, CBMs, and they chose ombudspersons of 2 countries. But I said no. I said in the situation when we have prisoners of war being illegally held in Azerbaijan, all these provocations at the borders, all these violations, there will be the behavior of Azerbaijan is only undermining peace. So what I think that what we could do is to really use this information to bring it to the international organizations that probably are in the countries that our compatriots live, or the government authorities, to at least to help to form the narrative and the agenda, of these countries, to kind of to lobby. For example, when it comes to the security zone, I'm preparing the concept. I will send to you as well, so that you could use these facts, to bring light to all these problems, which Azerbaijan always tries, and this is their ultimate purpose, to hide everything and to show to the world that there are no problems, everything is perfect. These are only the Armenians that are only claiming about the problems.
I'm unfortunately just going to thank you and stop here. I know that we all appreciate the immediacy of both your comments and your analysis, and we're grateful to you for the work that you do and for the time that you made available to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and I hope my intervention was useful. Thank you very much.
I believe it was useful. Thank you. And Viken and Shushan, I don't know if you can say anything in 30 seconds, please do, because we're already way over the hour and 30 minutes we promise our audience. Shushan, you want to go first?
I was just going to say, those of you watching, you can't see that most of our former participants have stayed on the entire time. And it just speaks to the value and importance of the conversations we're having. So thank you, everyone who joined to participate, and thank you all of you who are listening.
Viken.
I don't know what to say in 30 seconds. There were so many ideas thrown in just in this hour and a half. It was very rich and very intense. I look forward to continue.
Thank you. I don't know if we actually charted a course to network, but I think that we laid out the elements of network, and so I hope that serves a purpose. Thank you, Dr. Viken Vartanyan. Thank you, Dr. Shushan Garabedian. And thank you to all of you who have been following this series. This was the 4th episode. One more episode this Friday called Global Nation, where we'll be speaking to representatives of communities around the world from whom we usually don't hear. Beirut, Istanbul, Moscow, Tbilisi, Buenos Aires. And we will also speak with a couple of specialists on, again, diaspora formation, all of this leading to a better understanding of Network Nation in the 21st century. Thank you for following us at the University of Southern California Institute of Armenian Studies. All of these conversations are available on YouTube, on the Institute's site, armenian.usc.edu, and in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts. See you on Friday.